that, as someone who does have to go early, I was particularly interested in the bylaws.
You'd like this call, Councillor?
The indoor domestic fires issue, and I was wondering whether you would consider precedence of business, bringing that item forward after lunch.
Yes, please.
Yep, we could do that. That's not a problem. If councillors are happy with that. Okay, next speaker, Councillor Penny Hulse, questions.
And in the interests of time, I'm happy to ask mine offline, Mr Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Collins.
Well, just a couple of questions, and Councillor Darby's already asked one of them around the Electoral Commission. Point 14, just interested in the methodology. How were they surveyed, and where did you get these participants from?
So it was done by an outside company, and I can give you all the technical details of the survey. I can send that to you.
Okay. Do you know if that outside company is the same that does events and asks people for emails?
No, it's not the same one.
That's fine. And just under the points that Warwick was talking about, the separation of the DHB elections, you note in point 14, if my Roman numerals is right, the increase of costs. So is that our imperative, or is that just noting it there, that's not the driver for why we have these two things together at the same time?
Oh, certainly my understanding of why the two elections were grouped at the time it was done, just years ago, was in the interest of cost, definitely. And so we do get because we organize the DHB elections and the licensing trust elections on their behalf, we do get a refund for part of our election costs at the end of it, and that would stop if we separated the elections. So it would look at an increase for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. A couple of things. In voter turnout, item 39, it gives a table that indicates the difference in turnout between Auckland and other areas. And I note down in Dunedin they get 45%, in Wellington City they got 45%. I don't need it now, but it would be useful to see what they're doing and what the reasons around that are.
The turnout I don't know for Dunedin, the turnout in Wellington has always been higher than one of the highest for the cities. What they did is actually used our research on the Love campaign to develop their own Love campaign, and we shared that research with us, so they acknowledge it freely. So it worked for them as well, apparently.
Sure.
But they also had a very close mayoral competition,
they did too.
and I think that probably had more impact than any publicity campaign.
You're saying you're putting people off. Your fault.
It should have been a closer margin, Councillor, and more people would have turned out. Councillor Cooper.
Hang on.
I'm sorry.
I had
I'm sorry,
another
mate.
question, and that's around also the voter turnout. And I mean, all we've got here is we've got a figure for Auckland, but we know if you look across Auckland, the difference across wards in terms of turnout is phenomenal. You know, I mean, without wanting to put a fine point on it, I mean, down south the turnout is real low, out west it's low, North Shore it's high, and so on. So as much and all as this is useful, frankly, it's that drill down information that would be very, very useful, because if we want to increase the turnout, it's pretty clear that there are particular locations that we could drive up. And what are the reasons around that? How many people are there in South Auckland, for example, that don't want to vote because they don't want to go on the roll, because they're living in a garage or whatever, and they're scared stiff that somebody's going to come knocking at their door. That sort of information would be really, really useful, because I don't think that we can take a one-size-fits-all across Auckland. We know also that there are huge ethnic differences in some parts of Auckland as compared to others, and that goes to having stuff in different languages and type of marketing that might be done in one area as compared to another. So, by way of a question, that's the sort of more fine information that I think we could benefit from.
So a couple of comments through you, Mr. Chair. The campaign, we did a lot of research about whether the campaign was going to reach the different voters that we had, and we actually concentrated on Asians, Pacific people, Maori, and we did target some of our messaging to those different populations. However, your point is well made, and that's one of the things that we want to look into in the next 3 years, is whether there's specific things that we can do to understand why participation in the areas where it is lower.
And just one comment I'd make, and on my part, I think it is useful to indicate whether a candidate is residing in an area or not. You know, there was a point made earlier about discouraging people from standing for the mayoralty for various reasons. Frankly, I think if you've got a whole lot of people from all around New Zealand standing for a particular area where they don't live in there, if anything is going to confuse people, that will.
Your Worship, the sort of comments and the nature of complaints that we got around this were in terms of candidates saying, well, they have to state that they live outside the area, but they're just over the boundary. But certainly, if it's the feeling of the governing body that we don't pursue that particular line, then we'll take that off.
That's my view anyway.
Yeah, sorry.
People find it useful.
Yeah, there is a discrepancy that parliamentarians don't have to disclose that, so I'm not quite sure why councillors ought, but that's the only substantive point that I can think of in that. Okay, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I was going to talk about demographics, but that's been well covered. Just in terms of, we contract to election services, don't we?
We do.
And I mean, I think some of the experiences around putting in nomination forms, it just felt like I don't know if this is true, but it seems that you go along, it's not election services staff who are processing the nomination forms, it's council staff who were, in some cases, not well trained. And I know for one person, someone went to get the form for them and they were given the wrong form. The person filled it out just expecting they were given the right form, and then they become ineligible. And it was too late. But, I mean, they should have checked themselves, I know, but there's an expectation that when you ask for the form for the thing you're standing for, you get the correct form. And so, and even in my own, when I put my nominations in, there was so much confusion by the person. They didn't seem to know, like they either weren't well trained or, so I don't understand if we're contracting a company to do it, and it costs us a lot of money, that we're then using council staff at the counter. So can you just explain to me why that happens? Because it wasn't a great process. Thanks.
So we've always, the key here is to provide options for people to drop their nomination form, to try and make it easier for them. And so obviously using our service centres, because it's the Auckland Council elections, makes sense. We did have some issues in some instances. The staff do it once every 3 years. We do train them, but in some instances there was a little bit of confusion, and that's something we're going to have to look at harder next time.
So you haven't really. So you're saying that if we use council staff, we've got to get them trained better. Was that I was trying to find out, or services to put their own people at our service centres who actually know what they're doing.
In terms of the electoral officer and independent election services, we have had some discussions, and that particular issue has been recognised. And one comment that he did make was that next time he intends to liaise much more closely with ticket managers to make sure that their teams are on board, they're properly organised.
This wasn't team. This was nothing to do with teams.
It wasn't a team.
No,
but
it was completely.
That's one of the
one
of the responses.
Yes. No, this was, fine. Thank you.
I think it's really important that our staff, if they're accepting nominations, get it right. The issues at stake are pretty big. Yep. And, if somebody gets the wrong form and they fill it out, yeah, they've got to share the responsibility, but we shouldn't have done that in the first instance. It's, I think it's an important point. We need to get it right. Councillor Casey.
Line 55, page 113, the $104,000 that cost us because somebody resigned on inauguration night in the Howick ward. What are we doing to make sure that doesn't happen again? Because this, Phil told us the last time we discussed it that the candidate knew that not resigning before, or not, or resigning after the oath meant a by-election. And what are we doing about that? A, to change the ridiculous rule, and B, some culpability.
So if you remember when we came to Finance and Performance to ask you for that extra money for the by-election, you passed a resolution asking us to seek legislative change so that the next highest polling candidate be declared elected in case we've got a resignation, and that will be part of the submission.
Okay,
Point
but
of
what
order,
about
sorry.
Sorry,
line
I'm
55?
sorry, I've just got a point of order on the
So,
floor.
There were two things in that resolution. It wasn't just the next highest candidate. So it's in the report. It was either the next highest candidate or the
Trial
on the
online voting.
next one before. Sorry, there was,
Okay, Councillor Casey.
sorry, councillor.
Okay, we've got Councillor John Watson.
Thank you. I mean, just a little further aside to the name on the, if you live in or outside the boundary, I mean, there was one local board in the last election where nearly 70% of the people didn't live in the local board area, so I would suggest that adds a different flavour again. My question, however, is to do with future resource and emphasis. When you read all the responses for likelihood of voting and awareness and all the rest of it, and if you're out on the campaign trail, you'll very quickly realise that a lot of people are intractable. They're not going to change it. That's part of an ongoing trend. Where change could occur, and this goes to what could be done in the future, is with our young people. So the kids voting, where that occurred, certainly in my ward, was incredibly successful in terms of awareness and interest, and also transferal to their parents. I'm not suggesting that the Auckland Council can lead this by themselves, but certainly in terms of national politics and local politics, there's a real case for having more of a civics element to the curriculum if we're really looking to the future and actually making a realistic dent in this rather than a couple of percent here and there. And as I said, the schools that did it, you can see that palpably with the people that attend the meetings. So I just wonder what sort of thought we have given as to elevating that kids vote perhaps to a more civics orientated program or a pitch to secondary and primary educators across the country as a whole, not just Auckland.
So the kids voting program that we run ourselves this time around, as we have before. And certainly as part of the voter participation project, we will have in our scope to work with different, national bodies to try and push for more civics education at school. And working with the Ministry of Education, there's actually a lot of people in New Zealand who are interested in making sure that this happens, and it's working with them to try to add our voice to those concerns. At this stage, I wasn't envisaging civics program at schools between the elections, but that's something we could think of doing if you thought that was a good idea.
Well, I guess just quickly to finish that off, the people that are, 15 now, they'll be voting in the next election. So every 3 years that goes by, you potentially lose, that cohort of people. So clearly, the sooner you start, the better. We haven't done it in New Zealand. It has worked in other countries that have done it, and I would suggest it would, long term, it would go a long way to addressing a number of the concerns that consistently arise here, election after election.
Thank you. Councillor Hills.
Yeah, I mean, we're running out of time, so it was just comments that I think that we're definitely running in the right direction.